Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for the warm introduction. I am very excited to be here. I'm excited for a couple reasons. The first reason why I'm excited, and it was mentioned, is I am a firm believer in the integration of science and practice. And it is a rare opportunity to have so much knowledge in the room and so much experience in the room. And so I'm looking forward to learning from all of you. I'm looking forward to the day today, sharing my perspective from the science or the research perspective, and hearing all of your practical experiences and seeing the combination, seeing where there is alignment and maybe where there's disagreement and things in which my perspectives maybe don't align, and so we can learn from each other. So I look forward to the opportunity to learn today and learning from all of you. Second reason why I'm excited is because of the topic. As was highlighted before, this is a critically important topic. Coordination in crisis situations. I study management. I'm a management scholar, so we study all sorts of things. And I think this is one of the most important topics, obviously, in terms of the impactful nature of the work and the implications that it has for organizations of all sense, all varieties of organizations. So I'm excited for the topic as well. So today I'm going to share some of my research that I've done over the past 20 years, and talk about a number of studies, a number of extreme contexts that we've looked at. And I'll focus on two broad topics, as was highlighted before. I'll focus on leadership in terms of how leadership is structured and coordinated within extreme teams in a team context. And then I'll look at expertise and how expertise can be combined and integrated within these teams. So I'm going to take those two broad themes, leadership and expertise, and overlay that with a view of a collectivistic perspective. So how these things can be combined, how leadership can be combined and shared, how expertise can best be combined from a coordination standpoint. One thing that you also see is that I will take a contingent perspective. So the contingent perspective, what I mean by that is, well, it depends. And I am not going to stand up here and say this is the best way to do this, because what our research shows is that it depends on the context. So we'll talk about the context, we'll talk about the environment and how those all fit. So with that, I wanted to give a quick preview of some of these topics again. So the preview is I'm going to be first talking about leadership. And leadership here in the picture you can see is not just one individual, but I'm going to be talking about how it can be shared, how leadership can flow between individuals, and how it's a collective phenomenon for influence and for forward movement. I also will talk about expertise and how we can best coordinate, how we can best combine knowledge of individuals' unique knowledge for the team, and elements of individual differences and those ways to which we can accelerate them for positive outcomes for the team. As I mentioned, I'm going to take this contingency perspective, so I'm not going to say there's a right way. I'm going to say, well, it depends, right? And how to best lead a team, how to best coordinate expertise, it depends. Fortunately, I will try to tell you on the things that it depends upon, right? And I will give you some ideas. Again, look forward to hearing from the other speakers in terms of their practical experiences as well. And then I'm going to do this through a lens of research. And so my focus will be on a scientific view in terms of what my research says, again, over 20 years. I will talk about one study primarily that I've done in an extreme context and highlight questions that that raises in order to then talk about some other studies more briefly. Importantly, what I'm going to try to do is not get too deep in the weeds of the research, but instead highlight key takeaway points and things that may be able to be put in practice by others, and seeing how that fits with all of these practical experiences. So I'm going to give you the research lens, but importantly, we need to make sure that it can be applied and how it can be applied and different aspects associated with that. Great. So the first study I'm going to show you is in an extreme context, and I'm going to show you a video. It's a quick 1-minute video. It was conducted at the Baltimore Shock Trauma Center. This was the first freestanding hospital to treat shock in the world, world-renowned by R. Adams Crowley. And this is an extreme context in which patients come in that have been involved in motor vehicle collisions, gunshot wounds, stabbings, falls, any sort of blunt force trauma. About 70% come in via medevac helicopter, and they need to be treated quickly. So I'm going to show you a 1-minute video to give you a sense or a context of what it's like.
Shock trauma confirmed. Yes, sir. All right, that's it.
It's one of the few professions where I feel like you have the opportunity to save somebody's life every day.
We're always ready for the worst case scenario. 257? No. No?
You just really never know what's going to come through the door as the next patient.
Relax your left arm.
You don't get a second chance. You got to be right the first time.
The trauma, people can come in very sick. They could die within minutes of getting here.
Time is the enemy. You're working against the clock.
We all do this because we care, because we want to see people get better, and we want to have a hand in it.
You have to. You have to believe that even if the chances are 1 in 1,000, that's the one. This is unscheduled tragedy, what we do. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today's the day I'm going to get hurt.
So in the video, if you could hear it, the individuals had several quotes. So here are some quotes from the individuals to highlight the context, and it is an extreme context. So the first individual said, "You never really know what is going to come through the door next as the patient." That's uncertainty. They don't know when patients are going to come in. They don't know the injuries that they're going to come in with, and they may be notified only minutes beforehand. So it's a highly uncertain context. In addition, individuals said, "We're always ready for the worst case scenario." And so there's sort of complexity associated with this. There could be a mass casualty event where 20 patients come in at the same time. They have to be prepared for this high degree of uncertainty. Urgent time pressure. So people come in very sick and they could die within minutes of getting here. The standard within trauma care is something called the golden hour. In terms of being able to treat a patient within that first hour is critical for the success. And so time is of the essence in order to be effective. And then the last individual, this is the attending surgeon, Thomas Scalia. He said, "You don't get a second chance. You have to be right the first time. This is unscheduled tragedy, what we do." So it highlights the high reliability nature of it. You have to get this right, and it is critical. It's life or death situation. So this is really what we would call a VUCA environment, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it is an extreme context. At the Scientific Day last year, Professor Hanna talked about extreme contexts and extreme events. This is an extreme context where they are dealing with these crises on a daily basis in these extreme events, right? So I'm going to tell you about some research that we did in order to understand this. I did this with my colleagues. This was published in a journal called the Administrative Science Quarterly. And what this research is I was embedded in this hospital for 3 years. So I spent 3 years there doing observation. And I was wearing the pink surgical scrubs. I stood at the foot of the bed just behind the attending surgeon, and I observed hundreds of patients. I did many hours of interviews with many different individuals, really to try to get a sense of what is going on here. How do they do this? How are they successful? This is a very, very successful world-renowned shock trauma center. And how do they coordinate their expertise? How do they coordinate the leadership? And so this is, the treatment team as they come together. Some key aspects of this is that individuals, they come together to treat the patient. They maybe have never worked together before. So there's attending surgeons, there's surgical fellows, there's residents. In addition, there are nurses, anesthesiologists, medical specialists, orthopedic surgeons, for example. And the way that the TRU works, or the trauma resuscitation unit, is they may have never worked together before. And so there's a low sense of familiarity. And there are these variety of differing members of expertise, unique knowledge that individuals have, and differing levels of experience. There are medical residents who are just learning, all the way to the attending surgeon who's very, very experienced. So we wanted to see, well, how does this work? How does this extreme context work? And so we started with a simple question, or what we thought was a simple question. We asked, who is the leader? Who is the leader in the TRU bay? That's the trauma resuscitation unit. When they are treating the patient comes in, who is the leader? I am a researcher, a leadership scholar. I thought this was a simple question that would have a very clear answer. In terms of most research says the leader is X or Y. But you'll see that we didn't get a very simple answer. We got a very complex one. And I'm just going to show some quotes here, and I'm not going to belabor and read the quotes. You can read them if you want. But essentially, we heard many different answers. Some people said, oh, there's one leader. It is the attending surgeon. It is the individual at the top of the hierarchy. Some people would say, oh, no, there's two leaders, right? There's the attending and the fellow, or maybe three, the attending, the fellow, and the resident. Or everyone's a leader, the nurses, the anesthesiologists. And so there was not clear consensus for a simple question, who is the leader? That is interesting. As a researcher, that's interesting, because saying to myself and our research team, well, there's not agreement necessarily on who is the leader. And we thought there would be for this very successful extreme context. How does that work? How do they do that? And so we delved in more to try to really understand this. So I'm going to go through and talk about what we did to try to understand it. Again, this is a qualitative paper. I'll show you some quantitative research later in the presentation, but really trying to understand through observation, discussion, and talking. And so one of the first things we did is we said, okay, well, it's not necessarily clear who the leader is. Let's ask, what do the leaders do? What are the behaviors that they do in this resuscitation? So one key one is providing strategic direction. A leader needs to say, this is the game plan. This is the patient that comes in sick. This is how we are going to treat this patient. We are going to do X, Y, and Z first. And so it's the broad plan, the broad objectives for how they are going to treat the patient. In addition, there's monitoring. There's monitoring in terms of standing back, making sure that the patient's vitals are appropriate, making sure that team members are attending to the particular things that need to be done. Then we also saw providing hands-on treatment. And again, you can see some quotes here to illustrate some of these points. So sometimes leadership was getting in and actually doing the procedures, doing the tracheotomy or doing the resuscitation themselves for this extreme event. And then finally, there is teaching. So this is a learning hospital. Again, I mentioned there's these differing expertises. And so how do you treat or how do you teach individuals in order to learn in spite of this extreme context? So these were some key leadership behaviors that we saw. Importantly, you will see from the leadership literature, scholarly work, many leadership scholars talk about the importance of factors related to motivation and engagement, essentially, motivation and engagement. That's not present here. There's nothing about the leader motivating or engaging, and that's because it's this extreme context. Obviously, the context, the life-saving is motivating and engaging in and of itself. So we wanted to then see, we have many potential leaders, we have these different leadership behaviors. How do these combine for a leadership system? How do you coordinate these things? And the crux of it is this balance. And it's a balance between hierarchy. There is a rigid hierarchy. There is the attending surgeon. The attending surgeon is at the top of the hierarchy. Then there are the surgical fellows underneath the attending surgeon. And then under that are the surgical residents. It is a very, very clear hierarchical structure. However, importantly, that is coupled with this idea of fluidity or delegation. And so what we term is this idea of dynamic delegation. And dynamic delegation is respondent to the idea of these many leadership behaviors, these many potential individuals that can be leaders. And the crux for this leadership system is unique in that it combines a rigid hierarchy with fluid flexibility. So it allows for the leaders to shift, and the leadership can shift within the team. At any moment, a different individual could be the leader. So the attending could engage in this dynamic delegation process. Think of it like passing off a baton in like a relay race to a fellow, and the fellow could then be providing strategic direction or providing the leadership behaviors. And then that could be passed back to the attending, and then to a resident, and then to the fellow. And so it is this dynamic delegation process such that leadership does not reside in an individual. This is a de-individualized system. Its leadership resides in the role. It is a role-based approach, so understanding those roles and then understanding this dance or this dynamic nature of how the leadership ebbs and flows, which is really unique and different than much of the research on leadership. Traditionally, before this article, much of the research on leadership was about the one individual, how he or she leads in a very downward hierarchical fashion. This allows for this flexibility in order to best coordinate and best respond to these VUCA or these crisis situations. So, well, how does this work? How can we make this more effective? Again, like I mentioned, there are contingencies, and the contingencies are, it gets back to it depends. So what does it depend upon? What makes this more successful? What makes this less successful? Well, one of the things that influences how this dynamic delegation works is the patient's condition. That speaks directly to urgency and novelty. If the patient comes in and is crashing, they don't have a heartbeat, or a very novel situation, the attending surgeon will provide the hands-on treatment. And so urgency influences the extent of this delegation and how it plays out. In addition, there are individual differences, right? My background, my training, my PhD is I'm a psychologist, and so I study individual differences, how people differ. And there are clear individual differences here. So within the TRU, there were many different attending surgeons. Some of them were much more apt to be hands-off, to monitor, to allow others to take the leadership role. Others were much more hands-on. They didn't want to give up that leadership role. And so the extent to which this delegation can occur within the hierarchical structure depends upon whether individuals at the top of the hierarchy facilitate that from an individual difference perspective. In addition, there is confidence in terms of, well, to what extent will I hand off the baton? Well, I need to be confident that the individual that I'm handing the baton to can do it, or at least not harm the patient. I want them to learn, right? I want them to learn, and so that gets at confidence in the self as well. I want to give someone an opportunity to lead, give someone an opportunity to learn, but we can't harm the patient. I have to be confident that if they make a mistake, I can come in and correct it. And I am able to, as the attending surgeon or the person who has the leadership role at that time, function effectively in spite of potentially others' errors. And so you can see that these factors influence this dance. If you think of the dynamic delegation like a dance, it is the extent to which these things occur based on the uncertainty, based on the novelty, based on the makeup of the individuals, and then the confidence. Well, those are contingency factors. What are factors that influence whether it is successful or not, or what we call enabling conditions? Why does this work, right? This is a very extreme context, extreme events, very much a leadership system that is not defined per se. There are clear definitions, but how does this actually work, and why does it work? And so we found some what we call enabling conditions, factors that facilitate this. And so these are things that you'd want to think about for your organizations, the extent to which this occurs. So there's very much a strong culture routines, traditions, values. In the surgical care, the trauma care, in the United States, they follow the ATLS protocol, clear protocols for treatment. This is the way that we do it. And people understand that. It's a common knowledge, and they accept that, and they adhere to that. In addition, there's the values of we want to train, we want to teach, we need to build capacity, the next leaders in the system. And so that is a strong value that supports this willingness to hand off leadership. In addition, there's an expert support staff, the nurses. While many individuals within the trauma center are transitory, the residents are there for 1 month, fellows are there for 3 months. The nurses, many of them have been there for 20 years or more, a long time. They have expert knowledge of the setting, and they can help guide, they can help facilitate, and how to integrate that knowledge is key. And then finally, awareness of time and turnover. So individuals have a very much a distinct view of time in this organization in terms of, okay, residents are here for a month. If we have a batch of residents, a group of residents that aren't very good, they're going to be gone in a month. We will get new individuals here. And it's this constant turnover and understanding that, you know, this too shall pass if it is a bad situation. And so this is a way to facilitate this idea of this dynamic delegation or dance. And so you can see some key points, and I want to highlight some key points from this research and then highlight how it raises some key questions and talk about some other research that I've done to answer some of these. So a key first point is that dynamic delegation, it's this combination of rigid hierarchy and flexible fluidity. It is this dance. How does this dance work? So it's this de-individualized system of leadership. Well, that raises a question of, okay, how can we think about leadership then as both roles as well as behaviors? And I will talk about some research that looks at that. And how can it be shared? How can the individual designated leader share it effectively? You saw that I talked about contingencies, and dynamic delegation has these flexible enhancing processes while clearly role-based structures to facilitate this, and you need to understand the contingencies, how to best coordinate. And so then I'm going to ask some questions about, well, what other factors? This was the TRU context, the shock trauma context, very unique. What are some other environmental and process-based factors that facilitate the effectiveness of sharing of leadership, of having leadership being distributed, not residing in an individual? So I'll talk about that. Then there's the expertise. So the dynamic delegation is adaptable to individuals not working together before, but being able to combine their expertise. And so I'll talk about that a little bit more and look at, well, how can leaders leverage expertise? How can they best combine these? And then finally, understanding that this idea of dynamic delegation, it is a team-based approach, right? It is within team, which is the focus of this morning's session on teams. But these teams need to operate in a broader context. They need to interface, which will be kind of the focus of the afternoon in terms of maybe interfacing with other teams, the medevac helicopter pilots that come in. How do they do that? How do they cross those boundaries? And so I'll talk a little bit about looking at within team coordination and then between team coordination. So what I want to do now for the latter half of the presentation is just highlight some research, and it's just going to be some quick studies in particular to answer these questions. These studies that I'm going to highlight are quantitative in nature instead of qualitative, but they give hopefully some quick takeaways for answering some of these key points. So the first question, again, is this idea that I raised between roles and behaviors. And how can you structure this idea between roles and behaviors? And it really gets at this idea of balance. So I'm going to talk about a study that I did with my colleague Scott Dust. This was a review study. So this is just understanding the literature. And so what we did is we reviewed all of the literature, all of the published studies on multi-leader teams, teams with more than one leader. And we first said, well, how do people think about this? How do people think about this? And so what we did is we looked at the ways that which the prior scholars conceptualized leadership in terms of how many leaders are there in a team. Is everyone the leader? Is it just two people that's a leader? Or is it between two, but not everyone? So that is the vertical axis, how many leaders. Then we looked at how people conceptualize the roles. Is there role overlap in terms of, no, one person is monitoring, the other person's doing hands-on treatment, et cetera, or, hey, maybe there's multiple people, two people monitoring, all the way up to everyone is completing all of the same behaviors. So it's this idea of integrating roles and behaviors, and the numbers that you can see there on the graph is what percentage of the articles conceptualize it that way. So you can see that there's variability. There's variability in terms of the way the research scholars conceptualize how leadership can be shared. But importantly, most conceptualized view is this multi-comprehensive, in which everyone on the team can be a leader and everyone overlaps with roles. That's important to think about because it depends, these structures and how leadership is structured, on the environmental factors. And so this is an idea that we proposed, and you can see in terms of weighing off, well, when does this work? What are the benefits of multi-leader teams, and then what are the costs? So the benefits are, again, on the vertical axis, costs are on the horizontal axis. So the benefits are things like, hey, if everyone can be a leader, you get more diversity of thought. You get more backup behaviors. So if I can't do something, the leader can't do something, someone else can influence. But there's costs, right? It causes conflict. There can be conflict if there's many leaders, and there can be ambiguity. So you need to weigh the benefits and costs, and what we suggest is you can see in the novel and urgent context, these extreme contexts, the VUCA environment, that this multi-comprehensive is the most beneficial because it provides backup behaviors, provides capacity, and it provides a way to combine this knowledge. Whereas that wouldn't be effective in more traditional, less extreme contexts. So then wanted to continue to answer this question about how leadership can be shared, right? And what are the factors that facilitate this? And so we looked at a study, and this was another paper that we published, when we manipulated or we varied the extent to which there's a designated leader on the team, a nominal leader, this person is the leader, or there's not. And we wanted to look at this interplay between traditional leadership, vertical hierarchical leadership, and this shared leadership, this shared phenomenon. And so we did a study, and in particular, what we looked at is something that we highlighted in the prior paper, ambiguity. So we looked at the extent to which people thought it was an ambiguous environment. Again, that's characteristic of a VUCA environment. And what we did was then look at the extent to which leadership, vertical leadership, influenced the emergence of shared leadership. So what this graph here shows is it's an interaction. And again, I'm not going to get too deep into the statistics or anything, but I'm just going to give you the high-level takeaway, the research takeaway. And what that shows, the horizontal axis, is whether there's a designated leader or not. The vertical axis is the amount of shared leadership there is. And so what it shows, and the takeaway from this, is that under conditions of high ambiguity, that is the dashed line with the diamond, high ambiguity. When there's high ambiguity, having a designated leader helps the emergence of shared leadership. So you want to have a designated leader, someone in charge, when there is high ambiguity, and that individual can help facilitate this collective or this shared leadership. Very important for thinking about these leadership structures and thinking about these extreme contexts. So then moving to the second question, and the second question then is, okay, we can understand the shared leadership. What are factors that influence it? What are factors that influence the effectiveness of this collective form of leadership? Again, we looked at these contingent factors in the shock trauma study and looking at other ones in other different environments. And so first going to talk about a paper that I published with some colleagues looking at collective charisma, so charismatic leadership in terms of setting the vision and those types of things. And you'll see that, again, there can be this designated leader. There's a designated leader, but that individual facilitates that shared leadership. So again, I'm going to show some variety of contingent factors. What this is the horizontal axis is the degree of collective leadership. The vertical axis is conflict, which there's conflict in the team. This is the destructive conflict. It's not productive conflict. This would be like relationship conflict. What we show is that the lowest levels of conflict are when you have this combination of both high vertical leadership and high collective leadership. So again, it's this combination. You need both. You need a nominal leader, and it needs to be shared. When that is shared, that is the lowest level of conflict. We also showed that there were other factors that influenced lower conflict. So collective leadership was related to lower conflict. When there was high social inclusion, everyone felt part of the team. Everyone felt like they were a member of the team. And when there was high complexity. So again, getting at this VUCA environment. When there's high complexity, collective forms of leadership reduce conflict. So that is something, again, to reiterate, thinking about how to coordinate leadership in these contexts. Again, just another study on this, looking at some different contingencies. What we did here is we looked at more empowerment. Again, as I mentioned before, in the shock trauma setting, the leaders didn't do any sort of empowerment. It was empowerment. It was empowering in and of itself. And so we looked at factors in terms of potency. Potency can be thought of collective efficacy. Does the team believe that they can do it? Does the team believe that they can accomplish this task? And when they do, collective forms of leadership are positively related to team performance. Positively related. And then empowerment. And so again, that's that dark line is high levels of empowerment. The horizontal axis is collective forms of leadership. You can see that there's a positive relationship when there's high empowerment. When there's low empowerment, though, there's a negative relationship. It hurts. So if the team doesn't feel empowered, they don't feel like they have meaning, they don't feel like they have autonomy, sharing the leadership is actually negatively related to performance. So again, highlighting this, it depends. And here are some key factors that it depends upon. So third question that I'm going to talk about is expertise, how to combine this expertise. And again, looking at, okay, differing experiences, differing knowledge, differing backgrounds. How do we coordinate this effectively in differing complexities, differing environments? So this is a study, again, conducted with some colleagues, looking at contingency aspects, but looking at differing values. So team members differ, right? We saw that they could differ in their individual differences, their type A personality, that sort of thing, with the TRU study. But here they could differ in what they believe, what they believe to be true. And so what we looked at was work ethic diversity, so variability, diversity within the team in terms of the values of, this would be called Protestant work ethic, or the belief in hard work, that we need to work hard and that will accomplish our goal if we work hard. Or traditionalism, that's adhering to cultural norms of the country, values of the country. And people differ on that. What these graphs shows are opposite relationships. And so when there is task-focused leadership, this gets at the behaviors. When the leader focuses on the task, this is what we are going to do. It leverages, it facilitates the benefits of diversity. It is related to team effectiveness positively. However, in this study, if the leader focused on relational leadership and focused on the relational aspects, that actually had a negative effect, Broad brushstroke is to think about how the team is structured in terms of their values and how that then relates to outcomes based on the leadership. So again, some important contingencies. Next study is a study that we're working on now, and this looks at expertise or knowledge differences. So not values differences, but knowledge differences. And in particular, we looked at horizontal knowledge differences. So we looked at teams, and this outcome that we're looking at is innovation in teams. And we looked at the extent to which they differ in terms of their background. So you might have a psychologist, maybe you have a sociologist, maybe you have an engineer, maybe you have a medical doctor, people with differing knowledge levels. How does that diversity compare to, well, what if it's just a team of all psychologists like myself? How does that relate to outcomes? And then we couple that with a vertical aspect in terms of how much status differences there are. So what happens if there's a team with a Nobel Prize winner, high status, versus a team where it's more of this hierarchical? You know, there's a professor, postdocs, PhD students, you know, there's some variability, but it's not the extreme one Nobel Prize winner and 10 graduate students, PhD students. And so what we show here, and you can see the dashed line, it's a little bit hard to see at the top, the strongest relationship with innovation is when there's a team of different individuals. Knowledge diversity is good for innovation, but you cannot have too much status differences. If there's one key high individual Nobel Prize winner, people won't share. They won't share. And we showed that with a follow-up study such that looking at information elaboration. Information elaboration is how individuals combine knowledge, the extent to which they can combine it. And the best combination of knowledge is when they come from different backgrounds and there's not these extreme status differences, right? So again, understanding the makeup, understanding these contingencies, and it depends. The last thing that I will touch on, last study that I'll touch on, transitions a little bit, or previews maybe a little bit of what we'll talk about this afternoon in terms of how do you cross the boundaries? How do you coordinate not just within the team, but between teams? And how do teams interact together and come together in crisis situations, and how is that coordinated? And so it's teams of teams you can think about. This is a study that we published recently in the Academy of Management Journal with my colleagues. And what we did is we looked at teams that were assigned to build a structure, as a Rube Goldberg structure, and they had to combine it with other teams. And so you can think of it like building an airplane. Okay, there's someone that does the electronics, but the electronics needs to interact with the physical structure, the guidance system. So how do you combine all these different teams working on things? What we did to look at coordination is we had individuals wear what's called sociometric sensors, or badges. That's a sociometric sensor that measures who they are talking to, who they are coordinating with, who they are interacting with. And so then what we did is we looked at communication patterns, and we looked at who is talking with who. So we can see if people are talking within their team or between teams and crossing the boundaries. So this is just an example of what it looks like. Let me put this. So this isn't plain, but essentially we can get a network diagram of the interactions of individuals, and this was over time, a 10-week period. So is it best for individuals to focus their attention and communication within teams or between teams? And so this is the model. I'm not going to belabor that. But what we found in terms of our interactions is that what you want is a balance. If individuals focus only within their teams and not with other team members or other members externally, that causes conflict. The conflict raises. And then what we looked at was not just individual team performance, but system performance. And by system performance is, okay, was the airplane built successfully? Was this crisis event handled successfully by all the different inner organizations and the organizations? And what we find there, this curvilinear interaction at the bottom right corner, is that you need the balance. If people only focus within the team, it is bad performance for the system. Or if people only cross boundaries and talk to other members but not within the team, it's bad performance. And so you need to have this balance. And it's this balance, again, of internal communications, internal coordination with coordinating externally. We did a whole bunch of other analyses, and I'm happy to talk with individuals at the break. But again, this just gives you a flavor of it depends. It depends on how you can best coordinate. So with that, I wanted to leave you with a couple key takeaways, right? And trying to get both the forest and the trees. I know I talked about a number of studies. A number of them may not have fully sunk in. But the key points that I want to leave you with, based on the research that I've conducted, based on the shock trauma study and the other studies, are as follows. One, think about leadership not just as an individual, but as a collective, and how you can combine that collective, how you can combine individuals in sharing that leadership role for effective outcomes. Second thing is understanding that it depends. There's a balance, right? It's not, this is the one best way. It depends on a variety of factors. And so understanding those factors, understanding the extreme context, understanding the VUCA environment is important. In addition, you want to think about how you can leverage individuals' skills and their expertise and how you can structure that for appropriate outcomes. Again, that depends. And understand the interplay or the interdependencies of all these things in terms of the coordination, not just within teams, but between teams, and how factors, the nominal leader, impact the team, and how other factors, this highly interrelated, complex aspects are important. So with that, I will thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share. Again, look forward to hearing from individuals and their practical experiences and seeing the application. You can scan the QR code, or if you want any of the articles that I say, I want to read that research, Jonathan. Oh, I love it. You can scan the QR code there. I can email you the articles as well. But again, thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate being able to share some of my research with you and share some of the knowledge. And importantly, I look forward to seeing how it applies and look forward to learning from all of you. So thank you very much.